That rust bucket belongs in a scrapyard, not a car show. The words cut through the warm Saturday air, followed by laughter that rolled across the town square like a wave. Hundreds of people turned their heads. Smartphones rose. Smiles spread. And standing beside a faded blue 1967 Mustang with peeling paint and a dented front fender, Ethan Walker simply lowered his eyes and said nothing. Sometimes the strongest people in the world are not the ones who speak the loudest. Sometimes they are the ones who quietly carry promises no one else can see. The annual Sterling City Classic Auto Showcase was the biggest event of the summer. Polished chrome sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Vintage Corvettes gleamed like mirrors. Restored Camaros sat beneath spotless white tents. The scent of barbecue drifted through the air, while country music played softly from speakers mounted along Main Street. It was a celebration of pride, craftsmanship, and success. And among all that perfection sat Ethan's Mustang. Its paint was faded. Rust traced the edges of the wheel wells. The driver's seat had a tear patched with old leather. Compared to the other vehicles, it looked hopelessly out of place. 10-year-old Sophie Walker stood beside her father holding a paper cup of lemonade. She wore a simple yellow dress and a hopeful smile. To her, the Mustang wasn't broken. It was beautiful. "Daddy, maybe people will like it," she whispered. Ethan smiled gently. "Maybe they will, sweetheart." Before either of them could say another word, a sleek black SUV pulled up beside the exhibition area. Conversation stopped. Cameras turned. Victoria Sterling stepped out. At 38, she was one of the youngest automotive CEOs in America. Her company, Sterling Automotive, generated billions every year. She carried herself with effortless confidence. Every step seemed practiced. Every smile seemed controlled. As she toured the showcase surrounded by executives and reporters, people greeted her like royalty. Then she reached Ethan's Mustang. Victoria stopped. Her eyes moved slowly over the weathered body panels. One executive chuckled. Another shook his head. Victoria crossed her arms. "Who entered?" "This," she asked. Ethan stepped forward calmly. "I did." She looked at him, then back at the car. "You actually drove this here?" More laughter followed. Ethan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Victoria tilted her head. "Why?" The crowd leaned closer. Reporters lifted microphones. Ethan glanced at the Mustang for a moment before answering. "Because some things are worth saving." For a second, silence lingered between them. Then Victoria smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. "That may be true," she said. "But this car crossed that line years ago." The crowd erupted again. Sophie's smile disappeared. Her small fingers tightened around the lemonade cup. Ethan noticed immediately. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "Come on." Without another word, he guided his daughter away from the crowd. Behind them, the laughter continued. Ahead of them, the afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the pavement. And as Ethan walked toward the parking lot beside the daughter who meant everything to him, no one in that city could have imagined that exactly 30 days later, the same Mustang they laughed at would become the story every person in town would be talking about. The drive home felt longer than usual. The old Mustang rumbled softly along the Tulane Road, while late afternoon sunlight painted the fields gold. Sophie sat quietly in the passenger seat, staring out the window. She usually talked about school, friends, or the books she was reading, but today she barely said a word. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. After 10 years of raising her alone, he had learned that silence often carried more weight than tears. The Mustang turned onto a gravel driveway leading to a modest white house beside a weathered garage. The property was small, but it was home. Ethan shut off the engine, and for a moment neither of them moved. The ticking sound of cooling metal filled the air. Finally, Sophie looked toward him. "Do you think she was right?" she asked quietly. Ethan rested his hands on the steering wheel. "About what?" "About the car." The question lingered between them. Ethan smiled gently. "People see different things." Sophie frowned. "I only see an old car." Ethan nodded slowly. "Most people do." He stepped out and opened the garage door. Dust floated through beams of sunlight filtering from the high windows. Tools hung neatly on the walls. Shelves held boxes of parts collected over many years. The Mustang rolled inside and came to rest in its familiar spot. Ethan stood beside it for a long moment. Sophie followed him. "Then what do you see?" she asked. Ethan's eyes moved across the faded paint, the worn chrome, and the small imperfections he knew by heart. I see a promise. Sophie tilted her head. Ethan reached into a cabinet and carefully removed an old photograph protected inside a clear frame. A young woman stood beside the same Mustang decades earlier. Her smile was bright. Her hand rested on the unfinished hood. Sophie immediately recognized her. Mom. Ethan nodded. Your mother found this car before we were married. He smiled at the memory. Most people thought it was junk back then too. Sophie stepped closer. What was she going to do with it? Restore it. Ethan's voice softened. Every weekend we worked on it together. We made plans. Big plans. The garage seemed quieter as he spoke. Outside, a breeze stirred the trees. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn echoed across the valley. Did she ever get to finish it? Sophie asked. Ethan looked down. No, for a moment neither spoke. Then he placed the photograph back onto the shelf. But she made me promise something. Sophie watched carefully. What? Ethan turned toward the Mustang. His expression remained calm, but there was something deeper in his eyes. Something steady. She asked me to finish it someday. Sophie glanced at the car again. The rust. The faded paint. The cracked trim. Suddenly it looked different. Not broken. Not forgotten. Just unfinished. Ethan opened the driver's door and reached beneath the seat. He pulled out a worn leather notebook. The cover showed years of use. Inside were dozens of sketches, measurements, and handwritten notes. Sophie slowly turned the pages. Mom drew these. Some of them. Ethan nodded. The rest are mine. Sophie stared at a detailed design unlike anything she had ever seen. You never stopped working on it. Ethan smiled. No, I never did. As evening shadows stretched across the garage floor, father and daughter stood beside the Mustang in silence. Neither of them knew that somewhere across town, clips from the auto show were spreading rapidly online. Thousands of people were laughing at the old car. Millions more would soon see it. But hidden inside that worn leather notebook was a secret almost nobody remembered anymore. A secret that would change everything over the next 30 days. The next morning began before sunrise. A pale orange glow stretched across the horizon as Ethan unlocked the garage and switched on the overhead lights. The familiar hum filled the quiet space. Sophie sat on a stool near the workbench, finishing her homework before school, while Ethan studied the leather notebook once again. The pages were filled with ideas, calculations, and sketches collected over more than a decade. Most people saw an old car. They did not see the thousands of hours hidden beneath the dust. They did not see the dreams preserved inside every handwritten note. Across town, however, the story was growing. By breakfast, clips from the auto show had spread across social media. The video of Victoria Sterling's comment had already gathered hundreds of thousands of views. Some people laughed at the Mustang. Others defended Ethan. Local radio hosts debated whether the car belonged in a museum or a scrapyard. The city had found its newest conversation. At Sterling Automotive headquarters, Victoria sat at the head of a glass conference table overlooking downtown. She barely paid attention to the meeting. Her tablet displayed the same video everyone else was watching. She tapped the screen and replayed Ethan's response. Because some things are worth saving. The words were simple, yet something about them lingered. One executive chuckled. The internet loves underdogs. Another smiled. Give it a week. Everyone will forget. Victoria nodded, but she was not entirely convinced. Meanwhile, Ethan spent the morning repairing a customer's pickup truck. The repair shop remained busy. Bills still had to be paid. Life did not stop because the internet had discovered his Mustang. Around noon, an unexpected visitor arrived. A young man carrying a camera stepped through the garage door. Mr. Walker, he asked. Ethan looked up from beneath the hood of a truck. That is me. The man introduced himself as Noah Grant, a local automotive blogger with nearly 2 million followers online. People are talking about your car everywhere, Noah said. I would like to feature your story. Ethan immediately shook his head. I am not interested in being famous. Noah smiled. That is exactly why people like you. Sophie watched from nearby, trying not to grin. Noah glanced toward the Mustang resting quietly in the corner of the garage. Can I ask one question? Ethan nodded cautiously. Do you really believe that car can become something special? The garage fell silent. The ticking wall clock seemed louder than usual. Ethan wiped his hands on a clean shop towel and looked toward the Mustang. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he answered, I do not believe it can become something special. Noah blinked. Sophie looked confused. Ethan smiled softly. I believe it already is. That evening, Noah uploaded a short interview. The clip spread even faster than the original video. Millions of viewers shared Ethan's words. Some called him stubborn. Others called him inspiring. But before the night ended, Noah posted one more message beneath the video. It was a challenge. 30 days. Restore the Mustang. Show the city what it is really worth. By midnight, the challenge had gone viral. Thousands of people were waiting for Ethan Walker to fail. They had no idea he had just accepted the challenge in silence. Day one of the challenge began with rain tapping softly against the garage roof before dawn. Ethan was already awake. A cup of black coffee sat forgotten on the workbench while he studied the Mustang under the glow of hanging shop lights. The internet had turned his life into a countdown clock. 29 days remained. Then 28. Soon the entire city would be watching every step. Most people would have felt pressure. Ethan felt responsibility. Across the garage, Sophie carefully pinned a handwritten calendar to the wall. She drew a small star on the first square and smiled. One day at a time, she said. Ethan nodded. That is how every worthwhile thing gets built. The following week settled into a relentless rhythm. Ethan worked at the repair shop during the day. He fixed transmissions, replaced brakes, and diagnosed stubborn engine problems for customers who knew nothing about the challenge happening after hours. Then each evening he rolled the Mustang into the center of the garage and began another shift. Midnight became normal. 2 in the morning became common. The old radio played softly while tools clicked and metal parts found new life. Sophie became his faithful helper. She labeled parts, organized bolts, cleaned trim pieces with careful hands. Sometimes she fell asleep in a chair beside the workbench with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. Ethan would carry her inside and then return to work alone beneath the lights. Every few days, Noah Grant stopped by with a camera. His videos attracted millions of views. People debated everything. Some claimed Ethan was wasting his time. Others cheered him on. The comments multiplied by the thousands. Yet Ethan rarely read them. He focused on the next bolt, the next measurement, the next small step forward. Quiet dignity often grows in places where applause cannot reach. Meanwhile, at Sterling Automotive headquarters, Victoria Sterling found herself checking Noah's updates more often than she wanted to admit. During lunch breaks, she watched clips of Ethan and Sophie working side by side. There was no anger in his interviews, no bitterness, no attempt to embarrass anyone. He simply worked. One evening, an executive entered her office carrying a tablet. The restoration videos have surpassed 12 million views, he said. Victoria glanced at the screen. Ethan was teaching Sophie how to polish an old chrome mirror. The executive laughed lightly. People love a comeback story. Victoria continued watching. Maybe, she replied quietly. Back at the garage, progress slowly appeared. The rusted panels came off. New metal replaced damaged sections. Fresh wiring stretched through the frame. The Mustang no longer looked forgotten. It looked alive. Yet, the biggest secret remained hidden. Late one night, after Sophie had gone to bed, Ethan opened the leather notebook and turned to a section he rarely showed anyone. Detailed engineering drawings covered the pages. Calculations, concepts, designs far beyond a simple restoration. He studied them in silence. Outside, the rain had stopped. Moonlight filtered through the garage windows. Ethan rested a hand on the notebook and smiled faintly. 30 days was not enough time to rebuild a dream from scratch, but it might be enough time to finish one that had never truly been abandoned. By the middle of the second week, the challenge had become impossible to ignore. Local news stations were covering it. Radio hosts debated it every morning. Even people who had never cared about classic cars suddenly had opinions about Ethan Walker and his garage. Yet while the city talked, Ethan kept working. The steady rhythm of sanding, measuring, welding, and rebuilding filled his evenings. Every improvement was small. Every improvement mattered. Real transformation rarely arrives with fanfare. More often, it arrives disguised as patience. One Thursday afternoon, Victoria Sterling found herself watching another update from Noah Grant. The latest video showed Ethan and Sophie carefully installing restored interior panels. Sophie laughed when she accidentally dropped a screwdriver. Ethan smiled and handed it back to her. The moment lasted only seconds, but Victoria replayed it twice. Something about their quiet determination unsettled her. She could not explain why. Later that day, she called an executive meeting. The discussion centered on a new luxury vehicle launch, but halfway through, an older engineer named Richard Dawson entered with a stack of reports. Richard had spent nearly 30 years in automotive design. He was respected throughout the industry. As the meeting ended, his eyes landed on a paused image of Ethan displayed on Victoria's tablet. "Where did you get that?" he asked. Victoria looked surprised. "You know him?" Richard stepped closer. His expression changed immediately. "Know him?" he repeated softly. "That is Ethan Walker." Victoria frowned. "The mechanic restoring the Mustang." Richard stared at the screen for several seconds. "That mechanic used to be one of the most brilliant automotive engineers I have ever met." The room fell silent. Victoria slowly lowered her tablet. "What are you talking about?" Richard sat down and removed his glasses. 15 years ago, major manufacturers were trying to recruit him. His prototypes were years ahead of the industry. Some people believed he would eventually change performance engineering forever. Victoria blinked. "Then why have I never heard of him?" Richard looked toward the window. "Because he disappeared." The answer only deepened the mystery. Victoria crossed her arms. "People do not just walk away from careers like that." Richard nodded slowly. "Most people do not." He paused. But after his wife became ill, he turned down every major offer. He left the corporate world. Nobody understood why. Across town, Ethan knew nothing about the conversation unfolding inside Sterling Automotive. He was busy helping Sophie align a restored dashboard panel. The garage smelled faintly of fresh paint and machine oil. Country music drifted from the old radio in the corner. For a brief moment, life felt peaceful. Then Noah arrived carrying his camera and a wide grin. "You should see the comments," he said. Ethan laughed. "I'm not sure I should." Noah shook his head. "People are trying to figure out who you really are." Ethan glanced at the Mustang. "I am exactly who I have always been." Noah smiled. "The internet disagrees." That night, another video update went online. Within hours, millions watched. But among all those viewers, one person remained awake long after midnight. Sitting alone in her office high above the city lights, Victoria Sterling stared at the screen and began asking herself a question she had never expected. What if the man she had dismissed in front of everyone was far more extraordinary than she had ever imagined? 10 days remained. The number hung on the calendar like a storm cloud. Every square Sophie crossed off seemed to make the clock move faster. Outside the garage, the city buzzed with speculation. Inside, the pressure finally began to show. Ethan stood beside the Mustang late one evening, studying the engine compartment. Fresh wiring ran neatly along the frame. The restored body panels reflected the overhead lights. From a distance, everything looked promising. Up close, however, one critical problem remained unsolved. The heart of the project was not ready. Ethan opened the leather notebook and compared measurements for the third time that night. Then a fourth, then a fifth. Something was wrong. The custom powertrain design he had spent years refining required specialized components that were expensive and difficult to obtain. Every possible solution seemed to create a new obstacle. The savings he had set aside for the restoration were nearly gone. The repair shop's monthly expenses were approaching. Reality was beginning to close in. Sophie entered carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She noticed the expression on his face immediately. "Bad night?" she asked softly. Ethan forced a smile. "Just a difficult puzzle." Sophie placed a mug beside him. "You always solve puzzles." Ethan looked at her and wished confidence were as simple as she believed. The next morning brought another challenge. A supplier called with disappointing news. Several critical parts would not arrive on time. Ethan thanked the man politely and hung up. For a few seconds, he simply stood there staring at the silent phone. The garage suddenly felt smaller. The air felt heavier. Even the familiar sounds of tools and machinery seemed distant. Quiet struggles often arrive without witnesses. They happen behind closed doors where courage becomes a private decision. That afternoon, Noah arrived expecting another progress update. Instead, he found Ethan sitting alone at the workbench reviewing old sketches. "Everything okay?" Noah asked carefully. Ethan hesitated. "The schedule is tighter than I expected." Noah nodded. "People online think you have everything under control." Ethan smiled faintly. "People online only see the highlights." Across town, Victoria Sterling continued following every update. She noticed something different in Noah's latest footage. Ethan's smile looked tired. His shoulders seemed heavier. For the first time since the Challenge began. She saw uncertainty. Later that evening, she found herself searching through archived industry records. One document led to another, then another. Hours passed. Finally, she discovered engineering papers authored by Ethan Walker nearly 2 decades earlier. Her eyes widened. The concepts were remarkably advanced, even by modern standards. She sat back in silence. The man she had laughed at was not merely talented. He had once been operating years ahead of the industry. Meanwhile, rain began falling outside Ethan's garage. The drops tapped against the roof while he opened the leather notebook once more. This time he turned beyond the familiar restoration plans. Hidden between older pages was a section he rarely visited. Drawings created jointly by him and his late wife. Ideas they had never shown anyone. Concepts they never had the chance to finish together. Ethan slowly traced a finger across one page and smiled. The pressure remained. The deadlines remained. The obstacles remained. Yet as thunder rumbled softly in the distance, a new realization settled over him. The answer he had been searching for was not in the latest designs. It had been waiting inside those forgotten pages all along. 7 days remained. The calendar on the garage wall no longer felt like a countdown. It felt like a challenge staring back at Ethan every time he looked up. Yet something had changed since that rainy night. The uncertainty was gone. In its place was quiet determination. Before sunrise each morning, Ethan opened the worn leather notebook and studied the pages he and his wife had created together years ago. What he found there was more than a collection of sketches. It was a vision, a design philosophy, a way of thinking about automobiles that valued elegance, efficiency, and character over flashy trends. While the city expected him to restore an old car, Ethan was preparing to reveal something much deeper. One evening, Sophie walked into the garage carrying a small cardboard box she had discovered in a storage closet. "Daddy, I found these." Ethan opened the box carefully. Inside were dozens of photographs. Pictures of him and his wife standing beside the Mustang. Years earlier. Pictures covered in fingerprints, grease stains, and smiles. Sophie picked up one image and stared at it. "Mom looked happy here." Ethan nodded. "Those were some of our favorite days." Sophie looked toward the car resting beneath the lights. "She would be proud of you." Ethan smiled softly, but said nothing. Some words are too meaningful to answer immediately. Across town, Victoria Sterling continued her late-night research. The more she learned, the more confused she became. Former colleagues described Ethan as brilliant. Former competitors described him as visionary. Yet every interview ended the same way. He walked away. He chose family over fame. He chose purpose over prestige. Victoria sat alone in her office, staring at the city skyline. For years, she had built her life around achievement. Quarterly reports, market growth, industry recognition. But the man she had dismissed seemed to operate by entirely different rules. And somehow those rules commanded a kind of respect money could not buy. Back at the garage, unexpected help began arriving. One retired machinist stopped by with custom fabricated components. Another former mechanic donated rare restoration parts he had been saving for years. A local paint specialist volunteered his expertise. None of them asked for publicity. None of them asked for payment. They simply believed in Ethan. Quiet character has a way of attracting people who recognize it. As the final week progressed, Noah Grant documented every milestone. His videos now reached audiences far beyond the city. Millions followed the journey daily. Yet Ethan still avoided reading comments. His attention remained fixed on the work itself. Then came the evening that changed everything. Sophie stood beside him as he carefully installed the final component connected to the design hidden inside the notebook. The garage was silent except for the soft hum of overhead lights. Ethan stepped back and studied the completed system. For a long moment, neither he nor Sophie spoke. Finally, she asked the question everyone else was asking. "What makes it so special?" Ethan looked at the Mustang and smiled. "Because nobody knows it exists." Sophie frowned. Ethan gently opened the notebook to one final page. There, beneath years of notes and sketches, was the original concept he and his wife had created together. A prototype unlike anything the public had ever seen. And for the first time in nearly 15 years, Ethan realized they were finally going to finish it. Day 30 arrived beneath a clear blue sky. Long before the official event began, people filled the streets surrounding the town square. Families carried folding chairs. Reporters adjusted cameras. Local business owners stood in doorways watching the growing crowd. What had started as a simple online challenge had become the biggest story the city had seen in years. Noah Grant moved through the gathering with a microphone in hand, while production crews prepared for a live broadcast. Everywhere he looked, people were asking the same question. Could the old Mustang possibly live up to the anticipation? Across the square, Victoria Sterling stepped out of a black sedan and immediately noticed the atmosphere. The energy felt different from the auto showcase a month earlier. Back then, people had come to judge. Today, they had come to witness. She found a place near the front and folded her arms quietly. For perhaps the first time in many years, she felt genuinely uncertain about what was about to happen. Then the church bell struck noon. Conversations faded. Cameras turned. A hush settled across the crowd. At the far end of the street, a garage door slowly rolled open. Sunlight spilled across polished pavement. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then a low, smooth engine note drifted through the air. Heads turned. Phones rose. The sound grew closer. What emerged from the garage did not resemble the vehicle people remembered. The lines were familiar, yet transformed. Deep metallic blue paint reflected the afternoon sun like liquid glass. Chrome trim gleamed with remarkable precision. Every detail appeared intentional. Every curve seemed timeless. The crowd stared in disbelief. Ethan sat behind the wheel wearing the same quiet expression he had always worn. Sophie sat beside him smiling so brightly that it seemed impossible not to smile with her. As the car rolled into the square, applause erupted. Yet Ethan was not finished. He parked near the center stage and stepped out. Reporters immediately surged forward with questions. Noah reached him first. The city wants to know what makes this car so special. Ethan looked towards Sophie before answering. The restoration is only part of the story. Curious murmurs spread through the audience. Ethan opened the hood. For a moment, nobody understood what they were seeing. Then several engineers in the crowd leaned forward simultaneously. Their expressions changed. One removed his glasses. Another whispered something under his breath. The system beneath the hood was unlike anything they expected. It was elegant, innovative, decades ahead of the era in which it had originally been conceived. Victoria stepped closer. Her eyes widened. She immediately recognized the engineering principles she had discovered in Ethan's old papers. Except now they were real, refined, functional, complete. A reporter stared at Ethan. "You designed this?" Ethan nodded. Then he gently placed a hand on the fender. "My wife and I designed it together." Silence followed. Not awkward silence. Not confused silence. The kind of silence that appears when people suddenly realize they are standing in the presence of something meaningful. The crowd stopped looking at the car as an object. They began seeing it as a story, a promise, a memory brought back to life. And as cameras flashed across the square and the city watched in awe, Victoria Sterling understood something she should have understood 30 days earlier. She had never been looking at a broken car. She had been looking at the unfinished legacy of an extraordinary man and an extraordinary woman. For several moments after Ethan finished speaking, nobody moved. The square remained completely still. Reporters lowered their microphones. Camera operators forgot to adjust their lenses. Even the city traffic seemed distant. What filled the space was not excitement. It was respect. The kind of respect that arrives when truth finally becomes visible. Then applause began. One person clapped. Then another. Soon the entire square erupted. The sound rolled through the streets like thunder. Sophie looked around in amazement. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she watched strangers rise to their feet. Ethan placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. This moment was never about proving people wrong. It was about honoring a promise. Noah Grant stepped onto the stage and smiled. "I think everyone here wants to know what happens next." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then an unexpected voice answered. "I do." The crowd parted as Victoria Sterling stepped forward. She walked slowly toward Ethan, her expression calm but sincere. Gone was the confidence that had once sounded like certainty. In its place stood humility. She stopped a few feet away. For a moment, she searched for the right words. 30 days ago, she began, I judged something I did not understand. The square fell silent again. Victoria glanced toward the car and then toward Sophie. I saw rust instead of character. I saw age instead of value. And I was wrong. No one interrupted. No one laughed. Some lessons are too important to rush. Victoria reached into her purse and removed a folded document. On behalf of Sterling Automotive, I would like to purchase the vehicle and preserve it as part of our innovation museum. A murmur spread through the audience. Everyone knew what that offer could mean. Recognition, prestige, financial security. Victoria named a figure that immediately stunned the crowd. It was more money than most people in the city would earn in many years. Cameras turned toward Ethan. Reporters waited. Sophie looked up at her father. Ethan smiled gently. Then he shook his head. The crowd blinked in surprise. Victoria looked confused. You are declining? Ethan nodded. Respectfully, yes. The silence deepened. May I ask why? Victoria said softly. Ethan turned toward the Mustang. Sunlight danced across the polished paint. For a moment, it almost seemed as if the years had disappeared. Because it was never built to belong to me, he said. And it was never built to be sold. He looked toward the crowd. This city gave my family a place to dream. It gave my wife a home. It gave my daughter a future. His voice remained steady. The car belongs here. A few people exchanged puzzled glances. Then Ethan revealed his final decision. He was donating the vehicle and its complete design archive to the city's Transportation and Innovation Museum, where future generations could learn from it freely. The square became quiet once more. This time the silence felt different. It felt larger. Victoria lowered her eyes. Sophie smiled through tears. Noah stood speechless. And as the afternoon sun settled over the city, everyone finally understood the lesson hidden beneath the entire journey. Real greatness is not measured by wealth, status, or applause. It is measured by character. 30 days earlier, people had laughed at what they saw. Now they stood in silence because they finally understood what had always been there. And in that silence, Ethan Walker's promise was finally complete. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more stories of courage, kindness, and second chances, because the people the world overlooks often leave the greatest impact.